Hi, everyone, and welcome to Café IBTTA. I'm Pat Jones. This is a special edition of Café IBTTA that focuses on the massive $1 trillion infrastructure bill that recently passed the U.S. Senate. In the next 30 minutes, we'll talk about what's in the bill and the effect it will have on tolling, the user pays principle, mileage-based user fees, and much more. Before I introduce our experts, I want to make an important announcement about IBTTA's in-person meetings this year. All persons participating in any part of the annual meeting and exhibition or board meeting in Anaheim, California, or the maintenance meeting in Louisville, Kentucky, in person, must be fully vaccinated against COVID-19 and must submit proof of vaccinated status. This requirement applies to everyone, including registrants, speakers, sponsors, and exhibitor personnel, as well as family members and guests of any of the above, not including children under the age of 12. Fully vaccinated means at least 2 weeks have passed since a person received either their second dose of the Moderna or Pfizer vaccine or their first dose of the Johnson & Johnson vaccine. A copy or picture of the vaccination card is required as proof. With your privacy in mind, IBTTA will not be storing this information, just simply recording that we have received it. Instructions for electronic submission will be provided soon on our website. Now, back to the issue at hand for today. To help us unpack this giant bill, we have two experts, Mark Muriello, IBTTA's Director of Policy and Government Affairs, and Kathy Ruffalo, President of Ruffalo Associates and IBTTA lobbyist. Mark has 38 years of experience in transportation and public finance. As the former Deputy Director of Tunnels, Bridges, and Terminals for the Port Authority of New York and New Jersey, Mark oversaw the operations, maintenance, and planning for the agency's 6 tunnels and bridges and 2 interstate bus terminals that connect New Jersey and New York City. He also served on the IBTTA Board of Directors. Kathy Ruffalo is president of Ruffalo & Associates, LLC, a government affairs consulting firm in Washington, D.C. Kathy has more than 20 years of experience in the public policy arena at both federal and state levels of government. She served as a senior advisor to the United States Environment and Public Works Committee for then Chairman Senator Max Baucus, with primary responsibility for developing, drafting, and negotiating federal transportation policy. Kathy also served on the National Surface Transportation Infrastructure Financing Commission. Mark and Kathy, welcome to Café IBTTA. It's great to have you with us.
Thanks, Pat.
Thank you, Pat. It's great to be here this morning.
Well, this is Café IBTTA, where we drink coffee and we talk about things that are interesting, relevant, uplifting, and fun. And we are taking your questions and comments throughout the program. We ask you to please use the setting for all panelists and attendees in the chat function. So, Mark and Kathy, let's unpack this bill. First of all, this is an unusual bill. It combines at least 2 big things that are not normally joined. It's an infrastructure bill and a surface transportation reauthorization bill. Can you set the context for us? What does this bill look like?
Yeah, so you're exactly right. There's a lot that was going on here that kind of culminates in this bill, and lots of processes and forces that were happening simultaneously. And not only did we have reauthorization, but we had the introduction of the Biden administration and the president's Build Back Better vision in terms of policy and programs that he was putting forward, as well as the larger policy agenda in terms of social and human services programs that the administration is moving with Congress through this reconciliation process. So you had all these 3 forces coming together. And then in addition to that, you have differences in policy approach between the House and the Senate that are sort of competing with one another. You have Congress with razor thin margins in terms of the Democratic majority, so no vote can be lost. you have divisions within the parties. You know, the Republicans trying to keep conservatives and moderates together, the Democrats trying to keep the progressive and moderate players together. So when you put this all together, it's been the perfect storm for a long summer in terms of debate and negotiations and maneuvering. And there was a lot at play just to get us to this point. But we're not at the finish line just yet. The House needs to act.
All right, and speaking of the House and their action, in a normal reauthorization, we would have a Senate bill, a bill passed by the Senate and a House passed bill, and the differences would be worked out in a conference. What do you think is going to happen in this case? Kathy, can you talk to us about that?
Sure, Pat, and thanks everyone for being here. So some of you have heard me say this, but I'm going to paraphrase the late Donald Rumsfeld. We have more known unknowns and maybe a few unknown unknowns right now in the process. So the bill, as Pat said, has passed the Senate 69-30. It's pending in the House. So the question is, what's going to happen now? There's really three things that the House can do. The House can request a conference, since now you have two bills that are different. They could request a conference, which is what normally, as Pat said, would happen. They could amend the bill and send it back to the Senate and ping pong things back and forth, or they could pass the bill as is. So, right now, it certainly appears that the pass the bill as is kind of winning the race. What we don't know is timing, right? You have Speaker Pelosi, who has said she's going to hold the bipartisan infrastructure bill until the Senate passes a full reconciliation package, which could be sometime in the fall. But as Mark said, you've got this push and pull between the progressives and the moderates as to timing of those two packages, the bipartisan bill and reconciliation. So I never bet against the speaker. She's very good at what she does. I imagine that she's got a plan and a way to finesse her caucus. She does only have a 3-vote majority, so it's certainly going to require a lot of her skills. But the bottom line, we just have to wait to see what's going to happen. Next week's a big week. The House is coming back early from their recess to take up the budget resolution. And they're also, the speakers asked the Rules Committee to start the process to consider the bipartisan bill. So a couple of key votes are going to happen early next week. We're going to see what takes place between those two wings of the party. We're all along for the ride, and we're going to have to just watch closely and pivot depending on what actions the House takes.
Beautiful. Kathy, thanks for setting the context for the bipartisan nature of this bill and what happens in between the House and the Senate. Mark, let's take a closer look at what's actually in the bill. And there's some really positive things from the perspective of the tolling industry, like a VMT pilot and a governing board or an advisory board that includes the tolling industry in that. Talk to us a little bit about some of the main features of the bill that will affect our industry.
Yeah, thanks. So, overall, I think it's a good place for us to be starting as the tolling industry. As compared to the House bill that was out there, this Senate version that we're working with has no requirement to add tolling agreements as part of tolling the interstates and tolling projects in general that come with federal support. So that's a big difference and a good starting point for us as an industry. And it helps us avoid some of the burdensome and costly requirements that were in the House bill in terms of reporting and just having these agreements in effect. The bill has a congestion relief program that advances a lot of innovative and integrated and multimodal congestion management solutions with lots of different pricing alternatives built in. Most importantly for us, it allows use of tolls on the interstate system as part of a project carried out under that program up to 10 urbanized areas. So hopefully that's a limit that we can live with. And in 5 years, if we have 10 bona fide congestion relief programs nationally, we'll be dealing with a good problem about the capacity limit there. As you mentioned, there's distance-based road charging in two forms. There's a national pilot that's being sponsored that will look at the things that the state programs haven't been able to look at to date in terms of how to scale up distance-based road charging at a national level. And the toll industry, in terms of a toll operator presence on the advisory board, is something that's required as part of this legislation. In addition, the legislation continues the program and support for the state and regional pilot programs as well. So we're going to have kind of a double set of kind of learning and research and development as we look at user pay principles and gas tax replacement options. Other things to note, there's a pilot program for a marketplace for toll credits where agencies could sell, transfer, or purchase unused toll credits to help them with their federal match. There's a lot in terms of alternative fueling and charging. There's $7.5 billion to build out the beginnings of President Biden's EV charging infrastructure agenda by designating alternative fuel corridors. There are changes in the TIFIA program that are helping to increase program use and streamline application. So there's a lot of good things for tolling in this bill, and a good place for us to be starting from.
All right, thank you very much, Mark. Let's talk a little bit now about some of the things, some sensitive things, some concerns that we may have about certain provisions that are in the bill, provisions that may not be as favorable to tolling as we would hope.
Sure, I'll start there as well. So there are, the congestion relief program, one of the things, there are a number of requirements that raise some concerns for us in terms of precedent primarily. Congress is looking to actually limit the maximum toll rate that any vehicle class, this is for projects that are funded through the program, but it would require that the maximum toll rate for any vehicle class not exceed 5 times the toll rate for any other vehicle class. And it also requires that tolls not be charged or varied by state of residency. As you know, lots of toll agencies today distinguish between home and away accounts. So I'm not sure the state of residency really gets at what we do, but there are 2 requirements in there that are somewhat troublesome in terms of just setting precedent in terms of setting toll rates and at a federal level. Another concern is some changes in Section 129A of Title 23, which would require federally sponsored programs from the point of enactment of the act forward that would allow HOVs, transit and paratransit vehicles to use the facility at a discounted rate or without a charge. Again, somewhat troublesome in terms of things that have traditionally been left to state and local decision-making. And then finally, there continues to be kind of a continuation of the FAST Act provisions in terms of discounts for over-the-road buses, that they be matching anything that's done for public transit operations. It's adding more requirements just in terms of auditing and compliance, which is just another burden for toll agencies and operators to have to bear. So those are a few areas that we've highlighted as areas of concern that we'd like to work on.
Okay, all right, thanks, Mark. This is a special edition of Café IBTTA in which we're focusing on the Bipartisan Infrastructure and Jobs Act. My guests are Mark Muriello of IBTTA and Kathy Ruffalo, our outside lobbyist, and we are taking your questions. We've got a question here from Lori Silvera from Rhode Island. She says, I understand that the Bridge Investment Program includes both a formula grant program and a competitive grant. I know what Rhode Island's share is of the formula-based program. Any idea of how much will be available through the competitive grant program? Any idea of that?
I don't recall the exact details there, so we'll have to get back to you, Lori, on exactly how it breaks out. I do know that there are grants for both large projects of up to $50 million per project, and then the ability to bundle smaller projects at $2.5 million per project. Each state I believe, gets either must get at least one large grant or two small grants. So those are some of the provisions I recall off the top of my head.
And Mark, would you say a couple of words about resources that we've posted to IBTTA's website?
Sure. So we do have on the advocacy page of the IBTTA website under the reauthorization section both the full language of the bill for you to have a look at directly, as well as our summary and analysis, which provides some highlights for you to look at, and then a more detailed section by section of some relevant sections that are of greatest interest to the IBTTA community.
Okay, great. Ed Regan has a question. He says, I assume that if the bipartisan infrastructure bill is approved, it would effectively take the place of the traditional reauthorization legislation that would be due at the conclusion of the FAST Act, correct? And the
Correct.
answer is yes, indeed. Yes, indeed. All right. So again, we are taking your questions. Please put them in the chat function using all panelists and attendees or everyone. And Mark and Kathy, let's turn to some other highlights of the bill that are of interest to the entire highway community, whether you're in the tolling industry or not. Tell us about some other highlights that people will be interested in.
Okay, I can start. So where am I?
Pat, if I'll just jump in while Mark's looking for his notes.
Thanks, Kathy.
Yeah, a couple of things that I would flag to folks, and of course it depends on where you're sitting, right, and what kind of industry or agency that you're working in. But there are some Buy America provisions that we should flag related to iron and steel and manufacturing and construction materials that folks are definitely going to want to take a look at. And then there's some new funding for resiliency, reconnecting communities. We already talked a little bit about the Bridge Investment Program, which is $40 billion. So there are some other funding opportunities that are out there, but again, it's going to depend on where you are in the tolling industry. And then just one other thing, if I could flag, Pat, as a challenge for I think all of us, in the asset concession section of the bill, there is some language related to tolling, obviously, but I guess my concern that I would raise with everybody is there's a real theme that we've been dealing with now for a number of reauthorization bills related to user fees, and a real hesitancy and unwillingness on the part of Congress to look at user fees as a way to pay for the surface transportation program. And it's certainly been highlighted this year with the president's desire not to have any increases in taxes or fees on folks making less than $400,000. And that's okay, that's a theme. But this time we actually see it in statutory language. It's actually in the bill that under the concession, asset concession section, it actually says that tolls from such an asset concession, if you use the grant program, cannot affect people that make less than $400,000. Now, I raise that only because I think all of us have a challenge in convincing members of Congress that it's okay to have user fees, but we're just not there yet. So I just flag that, Pat, as something kind of a homework for all of us, if this does become law for the next 5 years, to maybe retool and rethink how we talk to members of Congress and maybe get some support to look at this a little differently.
Great, beautiful, good advice, good advice. Mark?
So some other things of note, I think, are there's a fairly big carbon reduction program aimed at reducing emissions that looks at a lot of technological solutions and support to help in the climate and emissions reduction process that should be useful to our members. There's something called the Protect program, which is one of a kind of array of resiliency initiatives that provide grants for resilience improvements and allow infrastructure operators, including toll operators, to look at facility rehabilitation, restoration, reconstruction, movement away from floodplains, a whole array of kind of flood mitigation and rainwater and stormwater management initiatives, seismic retrofits on bridges. So there's a lot there for toll operators to be interested in. And then, as Laurie was mentioned, there's the Bridge Investment Program that will introduce some of these new competitive grants she was referring to help rehabilitate and rebuild bridges, both large and small projects. So a lot of other things to be looking at.
There seems to be a lot of interest in the VMT pilots, and Andrew Bunn asks if the VMT pilots are focused on all vehicle types or mostly electric vehicles, since those are the vehicles avoiding the gas tax. Thoughts about the VMT pilots and where the focus is?
The focus is really going to be across the board. So they talk about focus on passenger vehicles, on light commercial vehicles, as well as heavy commercial vehicles. So they're really kind of looking at the gamut. And what I like about the Senate language is that they talk about trying to capture the costs on the infrastructure of these vehicles. And it's very akin to what they've done in a lot of the European programs, where they've tried to target the actual pricing of the distance-based charge to the cost of maintaining the infrastructure over its life cycle. So I think there's a lot of merit to that.
Okay, very good. Kathy, anything to add on the VMT provisions?
No, obviously the House had to strip their VMT from their Invest Act for some kind of maneuvering on the House. So it's good if this is going to be the final package, and we don't know yet, but if it is the final package, that there is language in there regarding this these pilots, and that toll operators have their seat at the table.
Tom Nucky has asked a question about one of our favorite issues in the world, and that's interoperability. And he wants to know if there are any provisions in the bill that affect electronic tolling interoperability or reciprocity between the states on violations.
Very interesting question. Actually, the Senate bill is more silent on that than the House bill was. So kind of remains to be seen as kind of the House weighs in here, whether any of that comes back. But there's not a lot of explicit language on interoperability.
All right, thanks, Mark. Kathy, Ed Regan has another question about the specific provisions in the bill that say tolls can't be charged to people making less than $400,000 a year. I think that's a little bit of an interpretation of what you said, but if you could elaborate on that. And I know we call this out in the document that's on the advocacy page of IBTTA. Go ahead, Kathy.
Sure, and Pat and Ed and others, I apologize if I came across as saying that tolls couldn't be charged for people under $400,000. There's a section 71001, related to asset concessions. And it's a small grant program to provide technical assistance and expertise for any public agency that would like to explore an asset concession. In that section, so only in that section, there is language related to that concession agreement couldn't charge tolls for folks under $400,000. So I don't think it has a real impact. Not a lot of asset concession projects would need to access that grant program. But I flagged it only because I think it just shows a larger theme and challenge that we all have, again, related to user fees. So Ed, directly, it's section 71001. It's not on all toll projects. It's only for that small subset, and it's actually a subset of a subset, only if you want to access the grants. So sorry if I misstated that or caused any concerns about tolling.
I guess just one thing to add, Pat, also is that, overall, the process that we've been through and the outcome that we're dealing with right now in the Senate bill, it's not the best environment in total for user pay principles. While the VMT pilot programs are in place here, commitments to looking at the gas tax or even indexing the gas tax to inflation, which was on the table early in the bipartisan framework discussions, all kind of vaporized, and there are not many strong pay-fors or new revenue sources other than the VMT, kind of research and development, I'll call it, targeting user pay. And the bill explicitly, commits to more transfers of general fund dollars to fund the highway trust fund. So I think that's a concern for the industry that we really need to kind of keep our eye on and kind of sharpen our communications and advocacy on.
Mark and Kathy, to put a fine point on that, could you talk a little bit about the amount of money that has been transferred from the general fund to the highway trust fund with this bill, and what it says about sort of the arc that Congress has been taking since about 2008 with regard to the user pays principle?
Right. So this bill is targeting another transfer of $118 billion into the highway trust fund. And to date, since 2008, we're approaching about, this is an Eno Foundation estimate that, about $272 billion in funds since 2008 have been moved from the general fund to the highway trust fund. I mean, obviously, what we're talking about is, a system that has been built upon the motor fuels tax as a way to fund the interstate transportation system since its inception in 1956, and obviously, long before that. And a move away from that dedicated funding commitment. And it just kind of, I think it's troublesome because general fund transfers introduce a whole lot more politics into the situation than perhaps we would like to see.
And Pat, I'll just say that those of you who have known me over the years probably heard me 5 years ago say that there was just no way Congress was going to go back to the couch cushions to pay for the next surface transportation bill. So I'm going to refrain from making that prediction again this time, because as Mark said, they did go back to the couch cushions for $118 billion. But again, I mean, at some point, we really do need to find a way as an industry writ large, I put myself in there too, to talk to members of Congress about how to pay for the system and the use of the system going forward.
Kathy, you spoke a little while ago about Speaker Pelosi and her ability to advance legislation and work in conference. Tell us a little bit about the process from here on out. Is there any chance, or what are the chances of House language making its way into this bill, and what might that look like?
So it really depends on what path they take, right? We're back to the known unknowns. We know they're going to have to take action at some point because we have a September 30th deadline, either an extension or pass something. If they take up and pass the bill as is, but it just takes a little while, then it's just a matter of procedure. Certainly at any point, the House could decide they don't want to take up the bipartisan bill as is, and they'd like to request a conference and negotiate. That's the way we used to do it. It's certainly the way that I grew up in the Senate working on these bills. That's what we did. We sat across on the table and worked things out. It's just a little different this year. And even Chairman DeFazio appears to have pivoted towards working on these issues through reconciliation and the reconciliation process. So, again, too many unknown unknowns and known unknowns for me to really predict, Pat, but I'm sure something will present itself to the speaker and we'll find ourselves with some solutions at some point.
Thanks, Kathy. Mark, anything to add on that point?
I don't think so. No, I mean, I think, no.
All right, so I see there's a couple of questions in the chat. We probably won't get to all of them, and we will do our best to respond on the website. I do want to remind folks that once this bill reaches passage, we will do completion between both the House and the Senate. We'll do a more in-depth analysis of this and have another webinar to talk in more detail about what ultimately comes out. I'm going to take a step away for a minute and make a couple of announcements, and then return to you, Mark and Kathy, for any final thoughts. First of all, don't forget to complete the survey at the end of this session. We want to continue to improve Café IBTTA. Upcoming events, August 19th, that's tomorrow, the Leadership Academy Alumni Association Virtual Social. You can register online. Also, September 9th, the IBTTA Book Club, hosted by the Task Force on Diversity, Social, and Racial Inclusion. It's the book Cast, The Origins of Our Discontent by Isabel Wilkerson. Also, our upcoming in-person meetings, October 10 through 12, IBTTA's 89th annual meeting and exhibition in Anaheim, and November 4 through 6, the Maintenance, Engineering, and Roadway Operations Workshop in Louisville, Kentucky. As I said earlier, anyone who participates in these meetings must be fully vaccinated against COVID-19 and must submit proof of vaccinated status. And don't forget to complete the survey that you receive at the end of this edition of Café IBTTA. Mark, Kathy, any final thoughts or words of wisdom before we sign off?
I hesitate to say any words of wisdom because it seems like an oxymoron with me lately. But just thank everybody out there for all of your help throughout this process. We certainly have relied on your expertise to guide us, and everyone's been always willing to provide that. So I just really want to thank everyone, and certainly Pat, thank you for including me today.
You bet. Mark?
So, yeah, I mean, I'm going to follow on to what Kathy was saying too, is that, we're a long way from the finish line still, even though it may be weeks ahead. There's a lot that can happen in those weeks. So stay tuned. And then after this bill is hopefully approved by Congress and signed into law by the president, I think there's going to be a lot of opportunity for us to work with the administration, with USDOT, to kind of exact our influence on how things get implemented. So what I would say is continue to keep us in the loop. Please don't hesitate to reach out to me with your areas of interest and concern and the like. And together we're going to make a difference on this. So keep your ideas and interests coming forward.
Kathy, Mark, thank you so much. And I will add a word of gratitude to all the members of IBTTA for your tremendous support throughout this year and last year, the COVID times. Thanks for all your support through the Government Affairs Committee, the board, all the individual members of IBTTA who help us in our government affairs activities. Thank you. We ask you to be safe, keep in touch, and we'll see you down